They said it couldn't be done. They said the terrain was too unforgiving. They said the risks were too high and the cost was unimaginable. But Canada didn't flinch. They grabbed their shovels, revved up their engines, and cut straight through the mighty Rocky Mountains. All for oil, but what happened next? Nobody, absolutely no one expected it. This is the true story of a modern engineering marvel. A political lightning rod, a national dilemma, and an environmental time bomb that could change everything. It all started with a pipe, but not just any pipe. This was a pipeline that would stretch across mountains, rivers, forests, and even sacred indigenous lands. The Trans Mountain Expansion Project, known as TMX, wasn't just about moving oil. It was about securing Canada's place in the global energy market, about defying geographical barriers, and about answering one burning question: how far would a nation go to pump profit from the earth? At first, it seemed like a typical infrastructure upgrade. A $7.4 billion plan to twin an existing pipeline. But delays, protests, and lawsuits pushed that cost to nearly $30 billion. Yes, $30 billion for a single pipeline. To put that in perspective, that's more than what Canada spends on national defense in a year. And the biggest twist, it's owned by the Canadian government. Which means taxpayers like you are footing the bill. Sure, cutting through the mountains was an engineering nightmare. Drilling 18 tunnels, blasting through granite, crossing avalanche zones. But the real battle? It was political, it was legal, it was emotional. Dozens of First Nations communities opposed the route. Environmentalists warned of pipeline spills. And cities like Vancouver outright refused to cooperate. It became less about oil and more about who gets to decide Canada's future. Now enter Justin Trudeau, Canada's poster boy for climate action. He wore socks with whales on them. He hugged Greta Thunberg. He promised to lead the world in fighting climate change. And yet, he bought an oil pipeline. Critics called it the ultimate hypocrisy. Supporters called it strategic genius. Trudeau called it nation building. But no matter what he said, the backlash was deafening. While Canadians argued over the future, the past came roaring back. In 2007, a spill from the original Trans Mountain pipeline drenched a Burnaby neighborhood in 234,000 liters of crude oil. In 2020, a spill near Abbotsford leaked 190,000 liters. These weren't distant disasters. These were real people, real homes, real consequences. And still, construction continued. To build the TMX, workers had to drill through 18 tunnels and cross 37 major waterways. Entire mountainsides were reshaped, massive steel pipes were airlifted in, and entire towns had to reroute traffic and emergency services for years. It was a feat of brute force engineering, and it came at a cost. Not just in dollars, but in displacement, division, and damage. Supporters claimed it would create 15,000 jobs, pump billions into the economy, make Canada a global energy superpower. But critics said the boom wouldn't last. That automation would slash permanent jobs. That world demand for oil was already fading, and that the long-term costs would outweigh any short-term gain. From California to Copenhagen, the TMX became a global symbol, a test case for whether democracies could reconcile fossil fuel dependence with climate responsibility. International media zeroed in. Canada, climate leader or climate liar? And as pressure mounted, Trudeau found himself between a rock and a pipeline. But here's where it gets wild. As construction neared completion, global oil demand plunged. Prices crashed, green energy investment skyrocketed. And suddenly, that $30 billion pipeline looked obsolete. Some said it was Canada's version of the Concorde jet. Technologically stunning, financially doomed. But the story doesn't end here. Because what happened next blew everything wide open. We saw the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline become one of the most expensive infrastructure gambles in Canadian history. We followed the battle through courts, protests, and rocky terrain. And we learned just how far Canada went to cut through mountains literally and politically to keep its oil flowing. But what happened after the concrete dried and the cameras turned away? Well, no one saw this coming. It started with a leak, not oil, but documents. Internal government memos revealed that even before the pipeline was completed, analysts inside Ottawa were worried. Demand for oil may not support full recovery of TMX costs. In plain English, we might not even break even. And guess who foots the bill if the pipeline flops? You guessed it, Canadian taxpayers. While Canada was pouring billions into fossil fuel infrastructure, the world was sprinting the other way. The US passed the Inflation Reduction Act, pumping $370 billion into clean energy. Europe vowed to slash fossil fuel use by 55% by 2030. Even China announced a record investment in solar and wind. Suddenly, Canada's mega pipeline felt like a relic of a fading era, like building a blockbuster DVD rental store in 2024. Follow the money. While average Canadians debated morals and taxes, energy giants like Kinder Morgan walked away with billions. The company sold the original pipeline and expansion rights to the Canadian government for $4.5 billion, a massive win for them, and then they left. Canada wasn't just building a pipeline. It was buying into a high-risk oil gamble after the original players had already cashed out. But while money changed hands at the top, something extraordinary was happening on the ground. First Nations across British Columbia were organizing not just to protest, but to buy back the pipeline. The Project Reconciliation Initiative, the Iron Coalition, and the Western Indigenous Pipeline Group all proposed a bold plan. Let us own the pipeline. Let us benefit from what crosses our land. For many Indigenous leaders, it wasn't about embracing fossil fuels, it was about reclaiming control. As the TMX neared completion, another twist emerged. Oil originally meant for Asian markets was quietly being rerouted to US refineries. Why? Because Asia didn't want it. Demand wasn't as high as expected. And Canadian heavy crude was too expensive compared to global competitors. So instead of boosting Canada's global energy influence, TMX just deepened our dependence on US buyers. In the same year that pipeline construction ramped up, Canada experienced its worst climate disasters on record. The Lytton Fire burned an entire town to the ground. BC floods washed out highways and rail lines. And oil workers themselves were caught in the chaos. Suddenly, climate change wasn't theoretical. It was real, it was here, and we were fueling it. Gen Z wasn't having it. Teenagers were chaining themselves to bulldozers. College students staged walkouts, and youth-led lawsuits challenged the pipeline in court, claiming their right to a livable future. One 14-year-old plaintiff said it best: "My government says it cares about the future, then builds a pipeline through it. And then it happened. Not a bomb, not a sabotage, but a literal rupture." A small segment of the pipeline, only weeks into trial operations, suffered a rupture during pressure testing. No oil spilled, but it was enough to trigger investigations, delays, and panic. The company called it routine, but critics called it a preview. By 2024, Canada stood at a crossroads. The pipeline was nearly complete. Billions were spent, but the future uncertain. Was Canada still an oil nation, or was it trying to play both sides in a game that had already changed? Like, subscribe, hit that bell icon. You won't want to miss the final chapter of the pipeline saga that changed a nation and may change the world.